I'd ask him questions. I think I just want to hang out with him. And it's the most honest answer. I have a million questions for him, and I could interview him endlessly. But if I had a chance to sit down with him, I don't think I would waste the time on interviewing him. I think I would honestly just sit down, have a drink with him, hopefully eat something with him, and just sort of enjoy the overall feel of the experience of being with him, and enjoy the moment, and not ruin it with interview questions. This is what I would do.
Okay, so that's a segue. What is your research? If you're not going to interview him, what's the research process?
Well, look, if I had the opportunity, I would have interviewed Jim, 400 times, really, okay? But if I had like one chance to sit down with him, I think I would just enjoy the experience. For me, the process really involved, I sort of worked on everything simultaneously. So when I first started the book, it was, reaching out to people to get them, ask them if they could do an interview, and traveling to go see them. And whenever I could, I would sit down with someone in person and interview them face to face, because that was definitely my preference as opposed to Zoom. But COVID intervened, and so sometimes I was interviewing people online. But if I could avoid it, I would do it in person. But I was writing simultaneously, and so I started writing right away. I was researching right away, and I was interviewing people right away, and spent months and months and months at Jim's huge archive in Michigan. And for those of you who don't know, these libraries are these places of, speaking of libraries here at Patagonia, they're great repositories of people's papers, collected papers. And Jim's was absolutely massive. Hundreds and hundreds of boxes. Jim saved everything. And so my job was to sit there for months at a time. The real grueling, actual physical work of a biographer is sitting still and just sitting there and going, listening to the great biographer Robert Caro's sort of advice to turn every page. Don't leave a page unturned. And so I parked myself at Grand Valley for months and turned every page. And for Jim's archive, that's a Herculean task.
Yeah.
I often wondered why Jim saved everything. And, one reason is his brother John was a librarian. He was librarian at Yale, he was head librarian at University of Arkansas. And so one story goes that Jim, saved everything because his brother, and I think this is true, that John was always sort of coaching Jim to, and I think John also really believed that Jim was going to be a famous author from a very young age. And so encouraged Jim to save every correspondence, every letter, every scrap of paper, and save that. And thinking like a librarian, John was anticipating, right, having this great repository of information. But I was sitting in New York one time, and I was interviewing one of Jim's editors, a very famous editor named Terry McDonald. And Terry asked me, he says, why do you think Jim saved all that stuff? And I went through my spiel about John being a librarian. And then I said, what do you think? And he goes, one word, ego. I said, okay, there might be something to that too. So that was my process. It was sort of interviewing, researching, sitting at the archives, and writing all simultaneously. But typically focusing my research on pockets of time in Jim's life, and sort of fleshing periods out, because you got to take it sort of chapter by chapter, step by step.
Well, you mentioned his agent being kind of a character. I want to hear about that, but is there anybody that you're like, damn, I wish I would have interviewed that person? Or somebody that goes, hey, I want to interview about Jim, and they went, no. So I just wonder.
I really wanted to interview Jack Nicholson, and Jim was very good friends with Jack Nicholson. He met him a long time ago on the set of a film called Missouri Breaks that Tom McGuane, Jim's good friend McGuane, had written. And Jim was going up to set and with his agent and a group of other people, even though McGuane wasn't on set. So this movie has Nicholson and Marlon Brando in it. And Jim at the time was so sort of enthralled by the movie making process that he would go up to the set and just sort of hang out and watch what they were doing. And a group of sort of people with Jim would go up, and at one point the director sort of called McWayne and says, well, who are all these people on set? Right, because they'd all line up, and Jim got talking to Nicholson on set, and they just hit it off. You know, there was a real natural flow, really, really comfortable with each other. At one point, I think Jim let Nicholson take a shower in his hotel room because he didn't have one available at that moment on set for some reason, and they just got along swimmingly, real naturally and comfortably. And that began what was really for a very close friendship for many years. And at one point, Nicholson would loan Jim money to write his Legends of the Fall. So when Jim was really sort of going through a tough period in his life, Nicholson sort of came to the rescue, gave him a big chunk of money, and said, just write. And Jim used that time to write Legends of the Fall, and that's the book that really broke Jim's career, it was a breakthrough book, and really changed Jim's life, changed his family's life at that point. And so I really wanted to get to Nicholson and interview him, but by the time I did, and I tried multiple avenues to get to him, including his agent, Sandy Bressler, who my agent knew, and he just wasn't doing interviews, and I don't know why. He has personal reasons. He doesn't typically do interviews generally, and wasn't going to do mine. So that's the one that got away. That was my white whale.
That's a big one.
Yeah, but Bob Dattila was one of the very, very first interviews, maybe the first. And I remember, so Robert Dattila was Jim's really lifelong agent, literary agent. And from Jim's first book, or second book really, Bob came on board as his agent. And he had very little training. He was from Queens. He's a tough Sicilian who actually his family had ties to the mob. I think his aunt married Tommy Three Finger Lucchese. And so Jim loved this, right? He loved that Dattila had this sort of really tough reputation and wasn't afraid to sort of use it and then sometimes intimidate people. He had a reputation in the business for being very tough. And so, he loved this, but Dattila wasn't a big agent, and Jim, I think he preferred hiring, partnering up with a friend, someone who, Bob had gone to Michigan State with Jim, or around the same time, and Jim just liked the idea of having someone, with little experience represent him, but he liked his reputation for being so tough. So I called up Bob Dattila, one of my first phone calls, and I thought, I knew Bob was getting up there in years, and I heard this voice that was so forceful and youthful when I called him, and he goes, yeah, I think when he picked up the phone. Yeah, hello, Mr. Dattila, my name's Todd Goddard, this and that. And I said, I'd like to interview you for this biography I'm writing, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes, you got Jamie's permission? And I said, Jamie, yeah, I think, he says, have you asked her if you could interview me? And I said, well, no, not yet. And he said, call me back when you do. Okay, so eventually I get Jamie to give the okay, and I go up and visit Bob. And, he still wasn't ready to talk to me. We sat down on his front porch. He didn't let me in the house. He came up to the front porch, said, let's sit on the front porch, Sat there and sort of felt me out, and he goes, well, so you seem like a pretty bespoke guy. That was his word, bespoke. Bespoke guy. He's like, I think we can do something here. We can do something. And I've been told earlier by one of Jim's good friends, a guy named Bob DeMott, who's also a Harrison Scholar and edited Jim's Collected Conversations book. Bob says, you got to get to Dattila. You got to get to Dattila. He says, Dattila knows where all the bodies are buried. And so I'm up on his front porch. I say, Bob, DeMott says, you know where all the bodies are buried. He's like, I buried them. Yeah, I'm talking to the right guy. And so Bob was so gracious that I spent, and we just became friends. We spent countless hours together, and just me interviewing him and talking casually, and now I go out to lunch once a week with Bob, and we're good friends. But man, was that was an important interview for me, and it was great to have that sort of breakthrough.
Did you ever meet the Three Fingers guy?
No, Tommy Three Finger Lucchese, no. Bob has, but you can imagine Bob's the subject of a biography on his own, right? Like, and that's an understatement. Bob, I guess the Lucchese family, I don't know, this is being recorded, maybe I should just be quiet. He didn't really bury any bodies, okay? Just for the record.
Who asked you that question?
Bob, if you're watching this, sorry.
Well, speaking of buried bodies, did you have any surprises?
Any surprises? I mean, yeah. I feel like for me, I thought I knew Jim pretty well. I'd read his memoir, I'd read everything he'd written, and I felt like I had a pretty good, I'd read his conversations and interviews, and I felt like I had a really pretty good grasp of the sort of general arc of Jim's life. But, once you start researching, it was always a process of discovery for me, daily. I was always learning something new about him, and it was always a surprise to me. A couple things stand out, though. I was always taken by just how much Jim corresponded. I could not believe how many letters Jim wrote. One really famous conversation he had was with his close friend Tom McGuane, the writer Tom McGuane. And those two sort of circled each other in college, and McGuane reached out to Jim soon after they finished. And when Jim's first collection of poetry came out, Plainsong, McGuane wrote to him. He said, I saw your book, and I haven't seen what does he say? I haven't seen so many poems, congestion of poems, he said, since reading Gary Snyder's Rip Rap. He said he was so taken by Jim's book and regretted that they didn't get to know each other better at MSU. But that letter began a correspondence that would go on for more than 5 decades, 5, 6 decades of their life. They would write all the way up until the end of Jim's life.